The iron shackles hit the wooden platform with a sound that made every soul in Copper Ridge freeze. But these weren't the chains of slavery. Slavery was over. These were the chains of debt, and the woman standing on that auction block was about to be sold to pay what her dead husband owed. Meridian Cross stood in the back of the crowd, his dark skin glistening with sweat under the Arizona sun. The scar running from his left ear to his jawline told stories most folks didn't want to hear. He'd ridden into town that morning with enough gold in his saddlebags to buy half the territory, but he hadn't come for land. He'd come for her. The auctioneer's voice boomed across the square. A woman named Evangeline Hartwell was being sold into indentured servitude, 7 years of labor to pay her husband's gambling debts. The crowd murmured with a mixture of fascination and disgust. In the post-war confusion, such auctions had become grimly common. But what the crowd didn't know was that Evangeline Hartwell had another name, a name that haunted Meridian's dreams and fueled every mile he'd traveled to get here. She stood on that platform with her chin held high, her green eyes blazing with defiance even as her hands trembled. Her once fine dress was now faded and patched, but she wore it like armor. The same woman who had once spat in his face and called him something no human being should ever be called. The woman who had owned him. Meridian's hand moved instinctively to the brand scar hidden beneath his shirt, a mark she had ordered burned into his flesh when he was just 16 years old. The pain had lasted weeks. The memory had lasted a lifetime. Now the tables had turned in the most twisted way imaginable. The bidding started at $50. A local rancher raised his hand. Then a saloon owner. The price climbed slowly. $75, $100, $125. Evangeline's eyes darted across the crowd, landing on each bidder with a mixture of hope and terror. Then her gaze found Meridian. Recognition hit her like a physical blow. Her face went white as desert bone. Her lips parted in silent shock. 20 years had changed them both, but some faces burn themselves into your soul so deep that time can't erase them. She knew exactly who he was, and she knew exactly why he was there. The auctioneer called for higher bids. The crowd grew restless. Meridian stepped forward, his boots echoing on the wooden planks as he approached the platform. But what Evangeline didn't know was that Meridian Cross hadn't come to Copper Ridge for revenge. He'd come for something far more dangerous. Something that would shake this town to its very foundation and force everyone present to question everything they thought they knew about justice, mercy, and the price of redemption. The question was, would she survive learning the truth about why the man she'd once brutalized had traveled hundreds of miles to buy her freedom? Meridian raised his hand with the calm precision of a man who had never lost anything he truly wanted to win. $300. The crowd erupted in shocked murmurs. That was more money than most folks in Copper Ridge saw in 2 years. The other bidders stepped back immediately. No one could compete with that kind of cash. But Evangeline's reaction was what truly caught everyone's attention. Instead of relief, pure terror washed over her face. She began shaking her head frantically, her eyes wide with panic. "No," she whispered. Then louder. "No. Anyone but him." The auctioneer banged his gavel, confused by her outburst. "Ma'am, this gentleman has made a generous offer that will clear your debts entirely." "You don't understand?" Evangeline's voice cracked with desperation. That man is going once," the auctioneer continued, ignoring her protests. Meridian's dark eyes never left hers. His expression remained unreadable, carved from stone. But inside, memories crashed over him like a flood. The plantation house where he'd been born into bondage. The cotton fields where he'd worked from dawn to dusk. The day she'd chosen him for punishment when a tool went missing, not because he'd taken it, but because she needed someone to blame. The iron brand heating in the fire, her voice cold as winter wind. "Maybe this will teach you your place, boy." "Going twice." A man in the crowd suddenly stepped forward. "Wait just a minute." It was Sheriff Nathaniel Cole, his badge glinting in the afternoon sun. "I know that face. Aren't you the one they call the Ghost Rider? The bounty hunter?" Meridian nodded slowly. His reputation had traveled faster than he had. In 3 years, he'd brought in over 40 wanted men, dead or alive. Some said he was the best tracker west of the Mississippi. Others whispered he had supernatural abilities, that he could find anyone, anywhere, no matter how well they hid. "Well, I'll be damned," the sheriff continued. "What brings a famous bounty hunter to our little auction?" "Personal business," Meridian replied, his voice steady and low. But Evangeline knew exactly what kind of personal business. She'd seen that same cold determination in his eyes 20 years ago, right after she'd ordered his punishment. Even as a 16-year-old slave, he'd looked at her with promise of retribution. She'd sold him off the next week, partly to get rid of the evidence of her cruelty, but mostly because those eyes had haunted her sleep. Sold. The gavel came down with finality. The crowd began to disperse, but Meridian didn't move. He stood there staring up at the woman who had once owned him, who was now legally bound to him for 7 years of service. Sheriff Cole approached him. "Listen, Ghost Rider, I don't know what history you two have, but this is a lawful transaction. Whatever you're planning, I'm planning to honor the law," Meridian said quietly. 7 years of service as contracted. But the way he said it made Evangeline's blood run cold. 7 years. 7 years in the power of a man she had tortured, branded, and treated as less than human. As the sheriff walked away, Meridian finally spoke directly to her. "Get down." Those 2 words carried the weight of decades. The same words she'd used to command him countless times. Now the roles were reversed, and they both felt the terrible symmetry of it. Evangeline climbed down from the platform on unsteady legs. She stood before him, no longer the powerful plantation mistress, but a woman who had lost everything. "What do you want?" she whispered. Meridian looked at her for a long moment. Then he did something that shocked them both. He smiled, but it wasn't the smile of a man planning revenge. It was something far more complex. Something that suggested the next 7 years would be nothing like what either of them expected. "First," he said, "we're going to have a conversation about your son." Evangeline's knees nearly buckled. Her son Thomas, the boy she'd given up for adoption when her world collapsed. The child no one in Copper Ridge knew existed. How could he possibly know about Thomas? The color drained from Evangeline's face so completely that for a moment, Meridian thought she might faint right there in the dusty street. "My son?" she stammered. "I don't know what you're talking about." Thomas Hartwell, born March 15, 1849. Given up to the Sisters of Mercy orphanage in Santa Fe when he was 3 months old. Meridian's voice carried the precision of a man who had done his research. "Blonde hair, green eyes just like yours, has a birthmark shaped like a crescent moon on his left shoulder." Evangeline's hand flew to her mouth. The birthmark detail was something only someone who had actually seen her child could know. She had kissed that little mark every night during those precious 3 months before poverty forced her to give him away. "How do you?" she whispered. "Because I found him." The words hit her like a physical blow. She stumbled backward, her legs suddenly unable to support her weight. Meridian caught her arm, steadying her, the same gentle touch that had once comforted other slaves when she wasn't looking. "Where is he?" The desperation in her voice was raw, primal. Every maternal instinct she'd buried for 17 years came flooding back. "That depends entirely on you." Meridian guided her toward his horse, a magnificent black stallion that seemed to mirror its owner's quiet intensity. From his saddlebag, he pulled out a small daguerreotype photograph and handed it to her. Evangeline's breath caught in her throat. The young man in the photograph was unmistakably her son, now 17 years old, tall and strong, with her eyes and his father's stubborn jaw. But there was something else in the image that made her heart stop. Thomas was wearing a military uniform. He enlisted with the 9th Cavalry Regiment 6 months ago, Meridian explained. Buffalo soldiers, they call them. One of the first all-black regiments in the Army. "But he's not," Evangeline started, then stopped. Her son wasn't black, but he'd been raised in an orphanage with children of all colors. In his mind, those soldiers had become his brothers. "He doesn't know who his real mother is," Meridian continued. "Thinks his parents died in a cholera outbreak, but he's scheduled to ship out to fight Apaches in 2 weeks. Dangerous territory. Men don't always come back." The threat was implicit but clear. Her son was heading into mortal danger, and Meridian was the only person who could help her reach him in time. "What do you want from me?" she asked, though she already suspected the answer would be more complicated than simple revenge. "I want you to understand what it feels like to lose everything you love," Meridian said quietly. "But not the way you think." He mounted his horse and extended his hand down to her. "You're coming with me to Santa Fe. We're going to find your son together." Evangeline stared at his outstretched hand, the same hand she'd once seen branded and scarred by her orders. Now it was offering her the only chance she had to save her child. "Why would you help me find him?" Meridian's expression grew distant, haunted. "Because Thomas isn't just your son, Evangeline." The way he said her name sent chills down her spine. He'd never been allowed to use her first name before. But there was something else in his tone, something that suggested a connection she hadn't considered. "What do you mean?" "Get on the horse, and I'll tell you a story about a 17-year-old slave who was sold away from your plantation. A boy who spent years tracking down every person who was ever sold from that place. A boy who discovered that one of them had a very interesting secret." Evangeline's mind raced. What secret could a former slave possibly know about her son? But as she looked into Meridian's eyes, she realized that everything she thought she knew about her past was about to be turned upside down. Evangeline hesitated for only a moment before taking Meridian's hand. Her need to know the truth about her son outweighed her fear of the man she'd once brutalized. As they rode out of Copper Ridge, Meridian began to speak in a voice so quiet she had to lean forward to hear him over the horse's hooves. "After you sold me, I ended up on a ranch in Texas, spent 5 years there before I earned my freedom papers. But I never forgot that plantation, never forgot the people who were scattered like leaves in the wind when your husband's debt started piling up." The desert landscape stretched endlessly before them, dotted with sagebrush and the skeletal remains of dead trees. Evangeline had never been this close to Meridian as an adult, and she was struck by how different he was from the frightened boy she remembered. There was a quiet strength about him now, a confidence that came from surviving everything the world could throw at him. "I started tracking down everyone who'd been sold," he continued. "Most were dead. Some had found new lives, but there was one person I could never locate, someone who disappeared right around the time your son was born." Evangeline's heart began to pound. "Who?" "A slave named Isaiah. Young man about 19 years old. Worked in your husband's stables. Word was he'd been caught with one of the white women in town and was sold off quick to avoid a lynching." The blood in Evangeline's veins turned to ice. She remembered Isaiah, tall, gentle, with the most beautiful eyes she'd ever seen. He'd been kind to her during the darkest period of her marriage, when her husband's drinking and gambling had made her life a living hell. "But that's impossible," she whispered. "Isaiah was sold before Thomas was born." "Was he?" Meridian's voice carried a weight that made her stomach clench. "Or was he sold because Thomas was about to be born?" The truth hit her like a lightning bolt. The timeline, the way her husband had suddenly become violent and suspicious. The reason he'd insisted the baby be given away immediately, claiming poverty when they still had enough money to keep him. Her husband had known. He'd discovered her affair with Isaiah and sold him off to protect the family's reputation. Then when Thomas was born with features that might raise questions as he grew older, he'd forced her to give the child away. "No," she breathed. "That can't be. I found Isaiah 3 years ago," Meridian said gently. "Living in California, working as a blacksmith. He never knew what happened to you or the child, never knew he had a son." Evangeline's world tilted on its axis. Thomas wasn't just her son, he was Isaiah's son. The child of her forbidden love affair was about to march into battle with an all-black regiment, not knowing his true heritage. "Is Isaiah," she started to ask, "still alive, still asking about you every time I visit him?" The words hung in the air between them like a bridge she was afraid to cross. Isaiah was alive. After all these years of believing he was dead, killed by some vengeful mob, he was alive and thinking about her. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Meridian was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his words carried a pain that cut straight to her heart. "Because Isaiah saved my life once. When your husband was beating me for that missing tool, the one you blamed me for, Isaiah stepped in, took half the punishment himself. He didn't have to do that. Could have looked the other way like everyone else." Evangeline closed her eyes, remembering that day. She'd been so angry, so frustrated with her own powerlessness, that she'd needed someone to blame. Meridian had been convenient. Innocent, but convenient. "He protected me when no one else would," Meridian continued. "Now his son is riding into danger, and his son's mother is the only person who can save him. That's why I bought you, Evangeline, not for revenge." "Then why?" "To give you the chance to do something right. For once in your life." The words stung because they were true. But as they crested a hill and saw the sprawling valley below, Evangeline realized that Meridian's plan was far more complicated than a simple rescue mission. Because if Thomas learned the truth about his parentage, it wouldn't just save his life. It would destroy everything he believed about himself. They rode hard through the afternoon, the sun blazing overhead like a merciless eye. Evangeline's mind reeled with revelations. But one question burned brighter than all the others. "If you know where Thomas is, And you know where Isaiah is? Why do you need me? Meridian's jaw tightened. Because your son hates everything about the South, everything about plantation owners, everything about people like you. The words hit her like physical blows. What do you mean? The sisters at the orphanage told him his parents were wealthy Southerners who abandoned him out of shame. He grew up believing that rich white folks threw him away like garbage. That's why he joined the Buffalo Soldiers, to fight against everything he thinks his parents represented. Evangeline felt sick. Her sacrifice, giving up Thomas to protect him from her husband's rage, had been twisted into a story that made her son hate the very people he came from. He won't listen to me, Meridian continued. A black bounty hunter showing up with stories about his real parents? He'll think I'm lying, trying to trick him into deserting. But you? He'll hate me even more when he finds out what I really am. Maybe, or maybe seeing his mother risk everything to save him will change his mind about what kind of person she really is. They crested another hill and saw smoke rising in the distance. Not the thin wisps of a campfire, but the thick black columns of something burning out of control. Meridian spurred his horse faster. As they drew closer, the source of the smoke became horrifyingly clear. A stagecoach lay overturned on the road, its wooden frame crackling with flames. Bodies were scattered around it like broken dolls. Apache raid, Meridian said grimly, dismounting to examine the scene. Recent, maybe an hour ago. Evangeline stayed on the horse, her face pale as she looked at the carnage. But Meridian was studying something else. Fresh tracks leading north toward a rocky outcropping. Someone survived, he said. They're hiding up there. They approached the rocks carefully. Meridian called out in both English and Spanish, his hands visible and empty. After a moment, a weak voice answered. Help, please. They found him wedged between two boulders. A young soldier in a blue uniform, bleeding from a gash on his head. But when he looked up at them, Evangeline's heart stopped. Green eyes, blonde hair, the same stubborn jaw she'd kissed goodnight 17 years ago. It was Thomas. Ma'am, he whispered. Thank God. The Apaches. They took everyone else. I thought I was going to die here. Evangeline couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. Her son was alive, wounded but alive, looking up at her with trust and gratitude. He had no idea who she was. Meridian knelt beside him, checking his wounds. What's your name, soldier? Private Thomas Morrison, 9th Cavalry. We were escort for the stage. Apaches hit us at dawn. His voice was weak but steady. Are you folks from Santa Fe? Something like that, Meridian replied. Can you ride? I think so, but ma'am. Thomas looked directly at Evangeline. You look familiar. Do I know you from somewhere? The question hung in the air like a loaded gun. Evangeline found herself staring into the eyes of the child she'd given birth to. The baby she'd held for only 3 months before having to let go. He was looking at her with the same trusting expression he'd had as an infant. I don't think so, she managed to whisper. But Meridian was watching both of them with an expression that suggested this meeting was no coincidence. Actually, Thomas, he said quietly, there's something you need to know about this woman. Something that's going to change everything you believe about your life. Thomas struggled to sit up, wincing from his injuries. What are you talking about? And that's when Evangeline realized that Meridian hadn't brought her here just to save Thomas from the Apache wars. He'd orchestrated this entire meeting, the auction, the ride, even finding Thomas wounded and vulnerable. Everything had been planned to force this moment, the moment when a mother would have to decide whether to reveal the truth that could save her son's life, or protect the lie that had kept him safe for 17 years. If you're enjoying this story, hit that subscribe button, because what happens next will test everything you think you know about love, sacrifice, and the price of redemption. Thomas looked between Evangeline and Meridian, confusion clouding his injured features. What's going on here? You two know each other? Meridian helped Thomas to his feet, supporting his weight. We have history, but that's not what matters right now. Then what does matter? Thomas winced as he tried to put weight on his left leg. Evangeline felt the words building in her throat like a scream she'd been holding back for 17 years. This was her son, her baby, standing right in front of her, hurt and vulnerable. Every maternal instinct in her body screamed to tell him everything, to hold him, to never let him go again. But she also knew what the truth would cost him. Thomas, Meridian said carefully, what do you know about your real parents? My real parents? Thomas's voice turned bitter. Rich plantation owners who threw me away like trash when I was born. The sisters told me they were too ashamed to keep a child they couldn't provide for. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. Funny thing is, they could have provided for me. They just chose not to. Evangeline felt each word like a knife to her heart. Her sacrifice had been turned into abandonment. Her attempt to save him had become the source of his deepest pain. "What if you were wrong?" Meridian asked quietly. "What if the story you were told wasn't the whole truth?" Thomas studied Meridian's face with sharp intelligence. Despite his youth, there was something old in his eyes. The kind of wisdom that came from growing up without parents, from learning to read people's intentions for survival. "You're leading somewhere with this. Just say it." Meridian looked at Evangeline. The moment of truth had arrived, but she was frozen, terrified of the choice she had to make. "This woman," Meridian said slowly, "is Evangeline Hartwell. She used to own a plantation in Georgia before the war." Thomas's expression hardened instantly. "A slave owner." The words came out like a curse. "Yes," Meridian continued, "but she's also something else." The silence stretched between them like a chasm. Evangeline could feel her son's hatred radiating toward her, and she understood why Meridian had orchestrated this moment. Thomas needed to see her as a real person, flawed, broken, human, not just as the symbol of everything he despised. "She's your mother, Thomas." The words hit the wounded soldier like a second Apache attack. He staggered backward, his face cycling through disbelief, anger, and something that might have been hope before settling on rage. "That's impossible." "Look at her eyes," Meridian said gently. "Look at her face. You said she looked familiar." Thomas stared at Evangeline with new intensity, and she saw the moment recognition dawned. The same eyes that looked back at him from mirrors. The same stubborn set to the jaw. The same way of tilting his head when confused. "No," he whispered. "No, she abandoned me. She gave me away because she was ashamed." "She gave you away to save your life," Meridian corrected. "Because your real father wasn't her husband." The complexity of the revelation was too much for Thomas's injured mind to process. He looked like a man trying to solve a puzzle while drowning. "My father? A slave named Isaiah. A good man who loved your mother and never knew you existed." Thomas's knees buckled. Meridian caught him before he could fall, easing him down onto a boulder. The young soldier's world had just been turned completely upside down. I'm the son of a slave. You're the son of two people who loved each other in a world that would have killed them for it," Meridian said. "Your mother didn't abandon you out of shame. She saved you from a husband who would have murdered you both if he'd known the truth." Thomas looked up at Evangeline with eyes full of pain and confusion. Is it true? This was the moment she dreaded and longed for in equal measure. Her son was finally asking her directly, and she had to decide whether to claim him or protect him. "Yes," she whispered, her voice breaking. "You're my son, and I have loved you every single day since I had to let you go." But even as the truth hung in the air between them, Meridian was scanning the horizon with growing concern. "We need to move," he said urgently. "Those Apache who attacked the stage, they're coming back. And they're bringing friends." In the distance, dust clouds were rising. The sound of war cries carried on the desert wind. Thomas was injured. Evangeline was defenseless, and Meridian was just one man against what looked like a dozen Apache warriors. The family reunion would have to wait. Right now, survival was the only thing that mattered. The Apache war cries grew closer, echoing off the canyon walls like the howls of ancient spirits. Meridian counted at least 12 riders approaching fast, their horses kicking up clouds of dust that looked like smoke signals against the dying light. "Can you shoot?" Meridian asked Thomas, pulling a spare revolver from his belt. Thomas nodded grimly, checking the cylinder. Buffalo soldiers don't survive by being poor shots. But Evangeline could see the pain in her son's movements, the way he favored his injured leg. He was hurt worse than he was letting on, and they all knew it. "There's a narrow pass about a quarter-mile north," Meridian said, pointing toward a gap in the rocks. "If we can reach it, they'll have to come at us single file." "And if we can't?" Evangeline asked. Meridian's expression was grim. "Then we make our stand here." They mounted up, Thomas behind Meridian, Evangeline on her own horse. But as they spurred toward the pass, it became clear they wouldn't make it in time. The Apache riders were closing the distance too quickly, their superior knowledge of the terrain giving them the advantage. "They're cutting us off," Thomas shouted over the thunder of hooves. Meridian suddenly veered left, toward what looked like a dead end, a box canyon with steep walls on 3 sides. Evangeline's heart sank. He was trapping them. "What are you doing?" she cried. "Trust me," Meridian called back. They plunged into the canyon just as the first Apache arrows began to fly. One whistled past Evangeline's ear so close she could feel the fletching brush her hair. Another buried itself in the saddle horn inches from her hand. But as they reached the back of the canyon, Meridian dismounted and began pulling aside what looked like loose brush and tumbleweeds. Beneath was the entrance to a hidden cave. "Old mining tunnel," he explained quickly. "Abandoned silver mine. I scouted it this morning." "This morning?" Thomas stared at him with new understanding. "You knew this would happen." "I knew it was possible. Apache have been raiding this route for weeks. I came prepared." They led the horses into the cave, just as the Apache warriors reached the canyon mouth. The tunnel was dark and narrow, but it went deep into the mountain. More importantly, it had another exit. As they moved through the darkness, guided only by Meridian's sure steps, Thomas finally spoke the question that had been burning in his mind. "You planned all of this, didn't you? The auction, finding me wounded, the Apache attack, all of it." Meridian was quiet for a long moment. "Not the attack. That was chance, but the rest, yes." "Why?" Evangeline's voice echoed in the narrow space. "Why go to all this trouble?" "Because sometimes the only way to heal old wounds is to face them together." They emerged from the cave on the far side of the mountain as the sun was setting, painting the desert in shades of red and gold. The Apache warriors were still searching the box canyon, unaware of the tunnel. For the first time since the reunion began, they had a moment of relative safety. Thomas lowered himself onto a boulder, exhaustion and blood loss finally catching up with him. "I need to understand something," he said, looking directly at Evangeline. "If what you're both telling me is true, if you really are my mother, and you gave me up to save my life, then why didn't you come for me when it was safe? After the war ended, after slavery was abolished, why didn't you find me?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Evangeline realized this was the real test. Not whether she could claim him as her son, but whether she could explain 17 years of absence. "Because I was a coward," she said simply. "Because I convinced myself you were better off without me. Because I was afraid that if I found you, you'd hate me for giving you away in the first place. And now?" Evangeline looked at her son, really looked at him, the man he'd become despite everything. Strong, brave, principled, everything she'd hoped he would be and more. "Now I realize that my fear cost us both 17 years we can never get back." Thomas studied her face in the fading light. "What happens now? Where do we go from here?" But before anyone could answer, Meridian's expression suddenly changed. He was staring back the way they'd come, his hand moving instinctively to his gun. "We have company," he said quietly, "and it's not Apache." Through the desert twilight, 3 riders were approaching, white men in military uniforms. But these weren't regular cavalry. These were bounty hunters, and they were riding hard with a very specific purpose. Thomas was a deserter, whether he knew it or not. His unit thought he was dead, but if these men brought him back alive, there would be questions. Questions that could lead to a court-martial and execution. The family that had just found each other was about to be torn apart again. The 3 riders approached with the confidence of men who had cornered their prey. Their leader, a scarred veteran with captain's bars, called out across the desert evening, "Private Morrison, by order of the United States Army, you are under arrest for desertion in the face of enemy action." Thomas struggled to his feet, his face pale but determined. "Captain Briggs, sir. I was wounded in the Apache attack. These people saved my life." "That's not what the report says." "Soldier." Captain Briggs dismounted, his hand resting on his pistol. "Says here you were found 3 miles from the attack site with 2 suspicious characters. Looks like you were running." Evangeline felt her heart breaking all over again. After 17 years of separation, she was about to lose her son to a noose. But Meridian stepped forward with the calm authority of a man who had faced down worse odds. "Captain, I'm Meridian Cross. You might know me as the Ghost Rider." Briggs's expression shifted immediately. Every lawman west of the Mississippi knew that name. "The bounty hunter?" "That's right. And I can vouch for this soldier's character. He fought bravely against the Apache. Saved this woman's life." Meridian gestured toward Evangeline. "I saw it myself." "Even if that's true," Briggs replied, "orders are orders. Private Morrison comes back with us." Thomas looked at his mother, really looked at her for the first time since learning the truth. In her eyes he saw 17 years of regret, love, and desperate hope. She was a flawed woman who had made terrible choices, but she was here now. risking everything for him. "Captain," Thomas said quietly, "what if I told you I had information about Apache movements? Intelligence that could save lives?" Briggs leaned forward, interested despite himself. "What kind of information?" Thomas glanced at Meridian, who gave him an almost imperceptible nod. "The attack on our stage wasn't random. They're planning something bigger, a coordinated assault on the Santa Fe supply lines." It was a lie, but it was a lie that could buy them time. Briggs would have to take that information seriously, which meant keeping Thomas alive long enough to debrief him properly. "You're saying there's going to be more attacks?" "Yes, sir, but I'll only share the details with Colonel Mackenzie himself, in Santa Fe." Briggs considered this. If Thomas was telling the truth, the information could be invaluable. If he was lying, well, they'd find out soon enough when they reach Santa Fe. "All right, Private, you'll come with us. But these two," he looked at Evangeline and Meridian suspiciously. "They come too," Thomas said firmly. "The woman has information about supply routes. The bounty hunter knows Apache tactics better than anyone." Evangeline realized what her son was doing. He was protecting her just as she had once protected him. The circle was completing itself, but Meridian had one more card to play. "Captain Briggs," he said, reaching slowly into his saddlebag, "there's something else you should know." He pulled out an official-looking document with military seals. "Private Morrison isn't just any soldier. He's been selected for a special assignment, reconnaissance work that requires unique qualifications." Briggs examined the papers with growing confusion. They looked official, but something didn't feel right. "These orders are signed by someone I've never heard of." "Because they're from a very special unit," Meridian replied smoothly. "One that doesn't officially exist." The lie was audacious and completely unprovable, but it was also exactly the kind of mysterious military operation that everyone knew existed, but no one talked about. Thomas watched in amazement as Meridian wove a story that could save all their lives. But he also realized something else. This wasn't just about escaping punishment. This was about giving him a choice. He could go back to his unit, resume his life as Thomas Morrison, and pretend this day had never happened. Or he could step into an uncertain future with the mother who had given him life and the man who had saved it. "Captain," Thomas said slowly, "I need to ask you something. If a soldier discovered that everything he believed about his past was a lie, would that change his duty to his country?" Briggs frowned. "I don't understand the question, Private." Thomas looked at Evangeline one more time, then he made his choice. "Sir, I formally request transfer to Mr. Cross's special unit. Whatever that mission is, I volunteer." The words hung in the desert air like a promise. Evangeline felt tears she'd been holding back for 17 years finally begin to fall. Captain Briggs looked between the three of them, sensing undercurrents he didn't understand. Finally, he made his decision. "This is irregular as hell, but if the paperwork checks out," he handed the documents back to Meridian. "You've got 48 hours to report to Colonel Mackenzie. After that, we come looking." As the three soldiers rode away into the gathering darkness, Evangeline finally spoke. "What happens now?" Thomas helped her onto her horse, his touch gentle but uncertain. "Now we go find my father. Our family has been broken long enough." Meridian smiled, the first genuine smile Evangeline had ever seen from him. "Isaiah's going to want to meet his son. And there's something else. He's been saving money for 17 years, hoping someday he'd have a family to spend it on." "Money for what?" Thomas asked. "A ranch in California, far from anyone who cares about the color of your skin or who your parents used to be." As they rode toward their uncertain future, Evangeline realized that Meridian's plan had never been about revenge at all. It had been about redemption, for all of them. The black cowboy who had bought her at auction hadn't come to punish her for her past. He'd come to give her the chance to build a future worth living. And sometimes, that's exactly what justice looks like. If this story moved you, hit that subscribe button and join our community of people who believe in second chances and the power of forgiveness. Now click on the video on the screen to hear a story even better than this one, with a twist so powerful you won't forget it anytime soon. Click on the video now.